Hey there, good evening. Before we begin, I want to tell you something that might completely change the way you look at yourself and the entire human story. Right now, as you sit here listening, you are carrying inside your body atoms that were once part of ancient stars, stars that exploded billions of years before the Earth even existed. Your bones are built from the dust of collapsed galaxies. The iron in your blood was forged in the heart of a dying sun. You are, quite literally, a walking piece of the universe, a living fragment of cosmic history trying to understand its own origin. And tonight we are going to travel through all of it, from the birth of the first particles, to the rise of civilizations, to the world we live in today. And before we begin this journey, if my voice, my work, and these stories of our shared past find even a small place in your heart, then I kindly invite you to subscribe to this channel. Give this video a gentle like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. From Europe, America, Canada, Australia, or any corner of this beautiful planet, hearing from history lovers across the world genuinely warms my heart. Now close your eyes, relax, and let history begin. My dear friends, before we begin this journey, let us take a quiet moment and look at all the themes we will explore in this complete history tonight. A gentle roadmap of the story of everything. The birth of the universe, from nothing to everything, the formation of stars and galaxies, the cosmic architecture, the early earth, fire, oceans, and the first breath of life, the rise of single-celled organisms, the first spark of evolution, the age of early sea life, the explosion of biodiversity, the first creatures on land, the great migration to Earth, the age of dinosaurs, dominance, evolution, and extinction, the rise of mammals, survival after the firestorm. The first primates, the ancestors of humanity, the dawn of early humans, from Australopithecus to Homo erectus, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, a tale of two human worlds, the great human migration, how we conquered the world, the birth of civilization, agriculture, villages, and the first cities, the ancient empires, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages, knights, kingdoms, plagues, and faith, the Renaissance, art, science, and the rebirth of human genius, the age of exploration, brave voyages that redrew the world, the Industrial Revolution, machines, power, and global change, the modern era, wars, technology, and the digital world, the future of humanity, what comes after civilization. So, without further ado, let us step together into the very beginning, and place our feet softly upon the edge of creation. Before time itself began, there was only silence. Nothingness stretched beyond comprehension, a vast emptiness without shape or sound. No stars had yet ignited, no galaxies had yet spun into the darkness. There was no earth, no oceans, no life. Only the calm, endless void. Then, in a moment beyond measure, a spark emerged. A sudden surge of unimaginable energy, exploding outward, expanding in all directions. This was the birth of the universe, a beginning so profound that even the idea of beginning seems too small. It was everything and nothing at the same time. From this cosmic dawn, the first particles of matter and energy danced into existence. Quarks combined to form protons and neutrons. Light spread across the darkness, and in that gentle illumination, the foundations of all things were laid. Slowly, softly, gravity began to pull particles together, shaping the first clouds of gas that would one day become stars. Time, which had only just begun, carried these tiny atoms on a long journey. For billions of years, they drifted and swirled in quiet harmony, gathering into immense clouds. Within these clouds, pressure grew, heat built, and eventually, in the stillness of space, the first stars ignited. These newborn suns blazed with brilliant light, their warmth seeding the universe with the possibility of life. Around these stars, gas and dust began to gather, forming the first galaxies. Spirals and clusters took shape, spinning gracefully in the cosmic dark. Each galaxy, a city of stars, held the promise of planets yet to form, worlds yet to be born, and destinies yet to unfold. As eons passed, stars lived and died, their fiery hearts forging the elements that would one day make up everything we know. The iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones, the oxygen we breathe. These stars were the universe's first artists, painting the cosmos with the colors of creation itself. And from this magnificent, slow unfolding of light and matter, the stage was set for a small, blue planet to emerge, a planet that would one day cradle oceans, mountains, forests, and life. All of it began here, in this quiet, timeless space, where nothing became everything, and everything became possible. So as we sit here, listening to the story of the universe's birth, let us feel the enormity of it all. Let us breathe in the weight of time and space, and let our hearts settle into the gentle rhythm of creation. For in understanding how the universe came to be, we begin to understand our own place within it, the atoms within us that once danced in distant stars, and the incredible journey that has carried us from nothing to everything. The formation of stars and galaxies, the cosmic architecture, the universe, now stretching and expanding, began to take shape in ways both delicate and majestic. After the first particles scattered across the empty void, gravity quietly began its gentle work. Invisible yet relentless, it pulled tiny bits of matter together, coaxing them into clusters that shimmered with the potential of light. As these clouds of gas slowly compressed, the first sparks of energy flickered within them. Heat built, pressure rose, and somewhere deep inside the densest centers, the very first stars ignited. They were small, humble, almost timid against the darkness that surrounded them, but their light was a promise, a whisper that creation was far from finished. Over eons, these newborn stars began to cluster together, forming the first galaxies. Swirling spirals, glowing spheres, and sprawling clusters danced in silent harmony. Each galaxy was a city of stars, spinning gracefully in the cosmic dark, a delicate architecture of the universe itself. Some galaxies were calm, serene, their stars moving in gentle orbits. Others were chaotic, turbulent, with stars colliding and exploding, scattering the elements of creation into the surrounding void. These stars, both large and small, lived their lives with quiet intensity. Some burned for millions of years, casting steady light across the newborn galaxies. Others, more massive, blazed briefly, and then died in brilliant supernovae. In those final moments, they forged the elements that would one day become the building blocks of planets, oceans, forests, and life. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, each atom born in the heart of a dying star, drifting through space until it found a home in the swirling clouds of a future solar system. Gravity continued its patient work. It shaped galaxies, pulled clusters together, and sculpted the first intricate cosmic webs. Filaments of dark matter cradled gas and dust, guiding the formation of countless stars. Slowly, galaxies collided and merged, growing larger and more complex. Each collision sent shockwaves through the void, igniting bursts of star formation, scattering elements, and creating new possibilities. Within these galaxies, patterns emerged. Spiral arms curved like delicate brushes painting the sky, dense cores glowed with hundreds of thousands of stars, and nebulae glimmered like cosmic jewels. These clouds of gas and dust were nurseries, quietly nurturing the next generations of stars. Some of these stars would host planets, circling silently in predictable orbits, waiting for time to shape life upon them. The architecture of the cosmos was breathtaking not only in scale but in precision. The motion of billions of stars, the alignment of clusters, the silent, sweeping arcs of galactic spirals, all of it followed natural laws that whispered order into the apparent chaos. Dark matter, unseen yet pervasive, held it all together, shaping the cosmos with a gentle but invisible hand. Through millions and then billions of years, galaxies evolved, spun, collided, and separated again. Some grew massive and brilliant, others remained small and quiet. But each contributed to the vast symphony of the universe. Stars continued to burn, to live and die, scattering their essence into the void, creating the rich tapestry of elements that would one day become planets, moons, and the distant shimmer of life across the cosmos. Nebulae glowed softly in the darkness, marking the birthplaces of new stars. Dust clouds drifted silently, pulled into spiraling patterns, forming the shapes that would define entire solar systems. The universe was alive in a slow, patient, almost imperceptible way, moving, shaping, and preparing for the arrival of worlds that could one day cradle life. As galaxies spun gracefully in the void, light traveled across unimaginable distances. Some of the stars we see in the night sky today are already gone, their light only now reaching our eyes after millions of years. The cosmos is a living memory, carrying the history of creation in every photon of light, every atom of matter, every silent rotation of a distant galaxy. And through it all, the cosmic architecture grew ever more intricate. Patterns nested within patterns, spirals within spirals, stars forming around stars, clusters within clusters, a universe expanding quietly, meticulously, gracefully. In this immense, patient process, every atom, every particle, every spark of light found its place, waiting for the next chapter of creation to unfold. The first galaxies, their stars, and the cosmic webs that cradled them would lay the foundation for everything that followed. Planets, moons, asteroids, and comets would one day form from the leftover material. Life, in some distant future, would emerge from these carefully scattered elements. But for now, the universe existed in a state of serene, majestic beauty, its architecture unfolding silently, patiently, endlessly. The early earth, fire, oceans, and the first breath of life. So, without further ado, let us step gently onto the surface of the young earth and witness a world unlike anything we know today. The planet was a molten sphere, glowing with heat and alive with fire. Rivers of lava flowed endlessly, carving new paths across the surface, while volcanoes erupted with furious, unrelenting energy. The sky was thick with smoke and ash, a muted canopy that obscured the feeble light of a newborn sun. The ground trembled with every tectonic shift, mountains rising and crumbling in silent, unstoppable processes that would take millions of years to shape the continents. Time moved slowly, measured not in hours or days, but in the vast, patient rhythm of eons. Oceans had not yet fully formed, but shallow pools of water gathered in lowlands and craters, fed by rainfall and the melting of ancient ice carried here by comets from the far reaches of the solar system. These waters were rich with minerals and chemicals, swirling together in quiet, endless motion, forming the first stable bodies of water that would become the cradle of life. The atmosphere was thick and turbulent. Gases billowed from the planet's interior, volcanic eruptions injecting clouds of sulfur and carbon dioxide into the sky. Lightning flashed across the horizon, igniting chemical reactions in the early oceans, while the heat of volcanic activity infused energy into the waters below. It was a chaotic, violent world, yet within this turmoil, the first delicate stirrings of life began to take shape. Molecules collided, combined, and separated in endless cycles, experimenting quietly over millions of years. Slowly, patterns emerged. Some molecules developed the ability to replicate. They multiplied, forming the first microscopic cells. These single-celled organisms were invisible to the eye, yet they carried within them the essence of everything that would come after. They were the first sparks of life. Fragile yet tenacious, awakening in a planet still dominated by fire, water, and stone. The oceans themselves became a nursery. Currents carried these tiny life forms through shallow and deep waters alike, while light from the sun, weak but persistent, provided the first energy to some cells that could harness it. Others survived in darkness, drawing sustenance from chemicals in the water. Life was learning to endure, to adapt, to persist. The young Earth was a volatile teacher. Volcanoes continued to erupt, shaking the land and sending ash and chemicals into the seas. Tides and waves sculpted new coastlines. Minerals precipitated from the water, forming rocky reefs and islands. And amidst this ever-changing landscape, the first cells multiplied, experimented, and evolved, each generation slightly more sophisticated than the last. Slowly, the Earth's crust began to stabilize. New land masses emerged above the oceans, forming the first continents. Water lapped gently against the blackened rocks, balancing the extremes of fire and molten earth. The atmosphere, thick and turbulent, began to moderate. Oxygen started to accumulate in trace amounts, silently preparing the planet for the next great chapter of life. Every element on this young Earth played its role. Minerals from volcanic eruptions, salts from the oceans, and the energy from sunlight and lightning created the conditions necessary for life to flourish. Cells began to specialize, some developing the ability to photosynthesize, others feeding on chemicals around them. Life was learning the rules of survival in a harsh yet nurturing world. Time continued its patient march. Millions of years passed. The oceans swirled with microscopic life, invisible yet infinitely persistent. Each cell carried the blueprint of the future, the potential to evolve, to diversify, and to give rise to more complex forms of life. The first breath of life was not dramatic, it was quiet, subtle. A gentle emergence from the chaos of fire, water, and stone. The planet glowed softly under the young sun. Waves lapped against emerging coastlines. Volcanoes released smoke into the calming sky. Lightning still arced across distant horizons. And within the oceans, life persisted, multiplying and adapting, ready to take the next step toward complexity. The early Earth was a world of contrasts: fire and water, chaos and order, destruction and creation. From this dynamic, ever-changing environment, life's first fragile forms emerged, laying the foundation for everything that would follow. Every cell, every molecule, every ripple in the ocean was a part of the grand narrative of existence. A story that would stretch forward through billions of years, eventually giving rise to the richness and diversity of life on Earth. And so, the young Earth continued its quiet, majestic dance, its oceans shimmering under a sun that had just begun to warm the surface, a planet alive with energy and potential, ready to cradle life's first breaths and set the stage for all that was yet to come. The rise of single-celled organisms, the first spark of evolution. So, without further ado, let us dive into the ancient oceans, where the quiet miracle of life first began to unfold. The waters of the young Earth were dark and vast, filled with a mixture of minerals and chemicals, stirred by gentle currents, and the faint warmth of a distant sun. Within this primordial soup, molecules collided, combined, and separated in endless cycles, each movement a step toward complexity, a prelude to life itself. Amidst this swirling chaos, something extraordinary emerged. A molecule found stability. It began to replicate. It multiplied. Slowly, carefully, life made its first tentative appearance. These single-celled organisms were invisible to the eye, fragile yet persistent, carrying within them the potential for everything that would come after. Every cell was a spark, a tiny beacon of possibility in a world still dominated by fire, water, and stone. The oceans became a vast nursery. Currents carried these nascent life forms across shallow and deep waters alike. Some floated near the surface, absorbing the weak sunlight, while others clung to mineral-rich sediments, drawing nourishment from the chemicals that permeated the waters. Life was learning, experimenting, evolving. It was fragile, yet unstoppable, small, yet infinitely patient. Some cells began to harness energy from the sun, quietly converting light into chemical fuel through the earliest forms of photosynthesis. Slowly, oxygen began to accumulate in the oceans, changing the chemistry of the seas and preparing the stage for life as we know it. Other cells fed on chemical reactions from volcanic vents, thriving in darkness, adapting to the extremes of their environment. Every variation, every mutation, every tiny adaptation contributed to the unfolding of evolution's first steps. Time moved forward, measured not in years but in eons. Cells divided, multiplied, and formed colonies. Some began to specialize, cooperating in simple communities that foreshadowed the complexity of multicellular life. Life was diversifying in ways invisible to the naked eye, yet profound beyond comprehension. Each cell carried a story, a blueprint, a memory of survival etched into its very structure. Predation emerged in miniature. Some cells consumed others. Some evolved defenses, forming primitive structures to survive. The first ecological interactions, the earliest whispers of a web of life, were already taking shape. The balance between survival and adaptation, creation and destruction, was delicately maintained within the oceans, silent and patient, yet unstoppable. Over millions of years, cells became increasingly sophisticated. Membranes evolved to protect internal structures. Molecular machines appeared within, enabling basic functions to be performed with precision. Energy was harnessed, nutrients processed, and reproduction ensured. Life was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. The first hints of intelligence, encoded in the structure of these single-celled organisms, set the foundation for the extraordinary diversity that would follow. The young Earth was still volatile. Volcanoes erupted, tides surged, and storms swept across the oceans. Yet life endured. It adapted to extremes, persisted through cataclysms, and multiplied in ways that would shape the very chemistry of the planet. Oxygen continued to accumulate, slowly transforming the seas, laying the groundwork for a future where life could thrive in abundance. The oceans became richer and more complex. A living laboratory where evolution experimented with countless variations. Tiny cells floated, drifted, collided, and interacted, forming the earliest networks of life. These interactions, invisible and silent, were the first steps toward cooperation, specialization, and eventually, the rise of multicellular organisms. In this quiet, patient dance, life's resilience became evident. It was small, delicate, and invisible, yet it was persistent and unstoppable. Every wave, every current, every chemical reaction in the ocean contributed to the shaping of life's future. The spark that had emerged so long ago now glimmered more brightly, spreading throughout the seas, ready to ignite the next chapter of evolution. And so, in the depths of the ancient oceans, single-celled organisms flourished. They multiplied, adapted, and evolved, laying the foundations for all life that would follow. From these microscopic pioneers, all complexity, diversity, and intelligence would eventually arise. The first spark of evolution had ignited, quiet yet unstoppable, humble yet profound, carrying within it the promise of everything that would one day walk, swim, and fly across the earth. The age of early sea life, the explosion of biodiversity. Now, let us descend into the vast, shimmering oceans of the early Earth, where life had not only taken root but was beginning to flourish in astonishing abundance. The waters, once silent and simple, now hummed with activity as single-celled organisms had multiplied, adapted, and evolved into increasingly complex forms. In the dark and mysterious depths, something extraordinary was happening, the first great explosion of biodiversity. The oceans were alive with countless shapes and forms, each striving to survive and thrive. Tiny organisms, still invisible to the naked eye, began to diversify. Some developed hard shells to protect themselves from the predators that had begun to appear. Others grew spines, or adapted new ways to move and feed. The first ecosystems were forming, delicate yet dynamic, full of interactions and invisible battles that would shape life for millions of years. Coral-like organisms began to attach themselves to rocks and seabeds, forming the earliest foundations of reefs. Algae spread across the shallow waters, capturing sunlight and creating oxygen, transforming the chemistry of the oceans. Predatory cells evolved new ways to capture their prey, while herbivorous forms learned to graze, creating a balance that allowed life to multiply with astonishing speed. This period, known as the Cambrian explosion millions of years later, was in its earliest whisper now. A silent crescendo building beneath the waves. Life experimented endlessly. Tentacles, exoskeletons, shells, and simple nervous systems began to emerge. Some creatures floated freely, drifting on currents, while others burrowed into sediments or anchored themselves to the ocean floor. Movement became more sophisticated, and the first signals of coordination and interaction appeared. The seas teemed with microscopic and slightly larger organisms, forming the first food chains. Energy flowed from one form of life to another, a network of survival quietly unfolding across the ocean floor. Light filtered through shallow waters, casting a gentle glow that illuminated the tiny dramas playing out beneath. Evolution was relentless and patient, creating new forms, discarding those that could not adapt, and preserving those that found balance with their environment. Volcanic activity and shifting tectonic plates shaped the seas, creating new habitats, shallow lagoons, deep basins, and warm currents that nurtured diverse communities. The chemical richness of the oceans allowed life to explore countless variations in form and function. Every mutation, every adaptation, was a brushstroke on the canvas of life. Some of the earliest animals began to develop specialized organs for feeding and movement. Simple eyes appeared, allowing them to sense light and shadow. Muscles, however rudimentary, enabled movement across the ocean floor or through open water. Shells and spines protected them, while soft-bodied forms learned to hide or burrow. Predation intensified, pushing life toward ever more creative solutions. The diversity of life created complex relationships. Symbiosis emerged, as certain organisms learned to benefit from others. Nutrient cycles developed, as some species processed chemicals and waste that others relied upon. The oceans were a living laboratory, quietly, invisibly testing the possibilities of life on Earth. Time flowed slowly, measured not by days or years, but by the patient rhythm of evolutionary change. Life expanded into every available niche. In shallow reefs, tiny creatures filtered sunlight and nutrients. In the open ocean, predators roamed, while the bottom dwellers carved burrows in sediment. Every layer of the ocean became a habitat, every form of life a participant in the growing tapestry of existence. The chemical balance of the seas shifted with the proliferation of photosynthetic organisms. Oxygen slowly increased, creating a richer environment, preparing the way for more complex life forms to emerge. Life was no longer fragile and sparse, it had become abundant, diverse, and resilient. Each new organism carried the genetic memory of survival, encoded with the lessons of countless generations. The oceans were alive with color, shape, and movement. Though invisible to our eyes, the microscopic world of early sea life thrived with extraordinary intricacy. Coral-like structures, algal mats, tiny swimming organisms, burrowing creatures, and primitive predators all coexisted in a delicate balance. This was the age where the blueprint of all marine life was quietly being established. And yet, for all its diversity, the seas maintained a silent, majestic rhythm. Predators and prey, herbivores and photosynthetic organisms, plankton and benthic dwellers, all played their parts in the unfolding drama of life. Energy cycled, matter flowed, and evolution patiently sculpted the architecture of the first ecosystems. In this age, the foundations of life's future were set. The oceans, now rich with hundreds of forms of life, became the stage upon which evolution would continue its slow, relentless work. Each new organism, each subtle adaptation, was a step toward the incredible diversity that would eventually populate the planet, both in water and on land. And so, the age of early sea life marked the first great flourish of biodiversity, a quiet, unstoppable explosion beneath the waves. Life had moved beyond survival. It had begun to explore, adapt, and multiply, laying the groundwork for everything that would follow in the grand story of Earth. The first creatures on land, the great migration to Earth. So, let us now leave the oceans behind and turn our gaze to the shores of the ancient Earth, where life, having thrived in the waters for millions of years, prepared for its greatest journey yet, the migration onto land. The seas had become abundant with life, yet the land remained barren. Rocks and soil stretched endlessly, silent and untouched. The first hints of vegetation were just beginning to appear, simple mosses and tiny plants clinging to damp surfaces, soaking in the rain and the weak sunlight. It was here, at the edges of water and stone, that life would take its boldest step. Among the shallow waters, some creatures had begun to experiment with the world beyond. Fins gradually hardened into primitive limbs. Lungs evolved alongside gills, allowing the exchange of oxygen in the air rather than just in water. These pioneering forms were fragile, yet determined, moving cautiously from water onto mud and mossy surfaces. The first land creatures were small, often no bigger than a hand. They carried the lessons of millions of years in the seas, the ability to move, to sense, to survive. Their bodies adapted to gravity and the harshness of the dry land. Moist skin, flexible joints, and sturdy limbs allowed them to explore the new world. Every step was a risk, every breath a test, yet evolution drove them forward. Around them, the land was raw and untamed. Sunlight fell unfiltered upon rocks and soil. Storms swept across open plains. Plants were rare, providing minimal shelter, but life pressed on. These early explorers laid the foundation for all terrestrial ecosystems, learning to navigate the challenges of heat, dryness, and the unpredictability of the early Earth's climate. Some creatures began to climb, seeking refuge from predators and exploring new territories. Others burrowed into moist soil, creating small shelters and discovering ways to retain water. Reproduction adapted as well. Eggs developed protective coatings, enabling life to continue beyond the watery confines of the oceans. Life was learning to thrive on land. Predation and survival shaped every moment. Some early amphibians hunted insects and other tiny creatures that had also made the transition. Others became prey, testing their agility, their speed, and their instincts. Natural selection worked quietly but relentlessly, shaping each generation to better survive the challenges of life on land. The first forests were slow to appear. Tiny plants expanded along streams and marshes, creating microhabitats for insects, early amphibians, and other organisms. Life began to form complex interactions outside the water. Simple food chains emerged, with predators, herbivores, and decomposers all playing roles in this new world. The air, once alien, became home. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere had risen steadily, allowing metabolism and energy to sustain larger and more active forms of life. Sunlight provided warmth, while water from rivers and rainfall created corridors for expansion. The land was no longer empty, it was alive, waiting for the diversity that would soon follow. Time moved on. Evolution continued to experiment, adapting limbs, senses, and bodies to the challenges of land. Amphibians diversified. Early insects took to the air. Microhabitats flourished along the edges of rivers and lakes. Life was no longer confined to water, it had become truly terrestrial. And so, the first creatures on land forged paths where none had existed before. They carried within them the legacy of the seas and the potential for a future where life could thrive in unimaginable forms. From tiny amphibians crawling across mudflats to the earliest winged insects, the land became a new frontier, a world of opportunity and challenge, a stage upon which evolution would continue to shape the story of life on Earth. The Great Migration to land marked a turning point, a silent revolution that would echo through millions of years. Life had grown bold, persistent, and adaptable. It had left the safety of the seas and embraced the uncertainty of the terrestrial world, setting the stage for forests, deserts, mountains, and plains to be populated by an ever-expanding cast of creatures. From these humble beginnings, the first chapters of terrestrial life were written, quietly, patiently in the soil, on the rocks, and under the canopy of emerging plants. Every movement, every adaptation, every survival story contributed to the rich tapestry of life that would eventually span every corner of the planet. And so, the first creatures on land moved forward with quiet determination, carrying the spark of life from the oceans into a world that was waiting to be transformed. Evolution had begun its most ambitious journey yet, and the story of life on land was only just beginning. The age of dinosaurs, dominance, evolution, and extinction. So, let us step forward millions of years into a world ruled by giants, where life on Earth had reached an extraordinary scale. The age of dinosaurs had begun, and the planet was alive in ways unimaginable to us today. Forests stretched endlessly across continents, thick with towering ferns, conifers, and cycads. Rivers wound through valleys, and vast swamps reflected the brilliance of an unfiltered sun. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of vegetation and the distant roar of unseen giants. This was a world where dominance, evolution, and survival were tested on a scale far beyond what had come before. Dinosaurs emerged in countless forms and sizes. Some were small and swift, scuttling across the forest floor in search of insects and small prey. Others were enormous, their long necks reaching for treetops, their tails swinging like massive pendulums. Carnivores stalked silently, their keen senses honed for hunting. While herbivores grazed and migrated in herds, their behavior reflecting a deep evolutionary intelligence. Life in this era was not static. Evolution worked relentlessly, shaping bones, muscles, and behavior to suit an ever-changing world. Some species developed armor, others evolved speed or cunning, each adaptation a response to the pressures of survival. Predation and defense existed in perfect balance, creating an intricate dance that unfolded across millions of years. The oceans, too, teemed with giants. Marine reptiles glided through the waters, hunting fish and smaller creatures with precision. Pterosaurs took to the skies, their wings stretching across vast distances, casting shadows over the land below. Life had diversified to an extraordinary degree, both on land and in the air, reflecting the endless creativity of evolution. Time passed, and ecosystems became increasingly complex. Dinosaurs interacted with their environment in ways that shaped the land itself. Grazing patterns influenced plant growth, migrations formed new pathways, and predator-prey dynamics created natural checks and balances. Life was abundant, majestic, and powerful. Yet, even in this era of dominance, change was inevitable. Climate shifts altered landscapes, volcanic activity reshaped continents, and meteorological events created new challenges. Some species thrived under these changes, while others vanished quietly, leaving fossils as silent witnesses to their existence. Evolution demanded both innovation and resilience, and the dinosaurs, for millions of years, were supreme in their ability to adapt. But the age of giants was not eternal. Around 66 million years ago, a cataclysmic event reshaped life on Earth forever. A massive asteroid struck the planet, igniting fires, sending dust into the atmosphere, and triggering a cascade of environmental upheavals. The once thriving ecosystems collapsed, and even the mightiest dinosaurs could not survive. The sudden changes. Extinction swept across the planet, making way for new forms of life to emerge. In the aftermath, Earth was quiet. Forests regrew, oceans healed, and new species began to explore the opportunities left by the extinction. The dinosaurs' reign had ended, but their legacy persisted. Birds, the descendants of some of the smaller theropods, continued to soar in the skies, a living reminder of the giants that once ruled the Earth. The age of dinosaurs was a period of extraordinary creativity and power. It was a time when life reached heights of size, diversity, and complexity that would never be repeated. From the smallest insectivore to the largest sauropod, every creature played a role in shaping the ecosystems of the Mesozoic world. Their story is a reminder of the relentless force of evolution, the majesty of life, and the inevitability of change. And so, in the shadows of forests and beneath the sunlit waters, the dinosaurs lived, thrived, and ultimately vanished. Their world, rich and vibrant, continues to inspire wonder, a testament to the power of life and the relentless march of time, a time when the planet itself seemed alive with motion, sound, and power. Forests stretched endlessly, filled with towering ferns, cycads, and conifers that reached toward the sky. Rivers wound lazily through valleys, reflecting the brilliance of an unfiltered sun. The air was thick with warmth, humidity, and the scent of untamed wilderness. This was a world of extremes, of fire and water, predator and prey, growth and destruction. From the smallest creatures scuttling across the forest floor to the titanic sauropods lifting their long necks to reach the canopy, life had diversified in ways the Earth had never seen. Dinosaurs were not a single form, but a multitude of forms. Carnivores moved with precision and purpose, hunting with keen senses honed over millions of years. Herbivores grazed in herds, their massive bodies shaping the land, trampling ferns, and clearing paths for smaller species. Evolution had perfected a delicate balance of survival, predation, and adaptation. In shallow seas and deep oceans, life thrived with equal grandeur. Marine reptiles, sleek and powerful, navigated the waters with effortless grace. Some hunted in packs, coordinated and efficient, while others ambushed their prey with sudden bursts of speed. The oceans were filled with lifeforms of all sizes, from microscopic plankton to enormous ichthyosaurs that could swallow smaller creatures whole. Even the skies had become arenas of dominance, where pterosaurs soared, their massive wings casting shadows over the forests and waters below. The scale of life in this era was unprecedented. Some herbivores, like the giant sauropods, grew to unimaginable sizes, their enormous necks allowing them to feed from the tallest trees. These living towers moved slowly but deliberately, their presence shaping the landscape. Forests bent under their passage, rivers were diverted, and ecosystems shifted in response to their massive bodies. Each creature, large or small, played a role in a vast, interconnected web of life, a network of energy, survival, and adaptation. Predation was constant and refined. Apex predators like Tyrannosaurus rex or Allosaurus developed senses and behaviors that made them extraordinarily efficient hunters. Stealth, speed, and intelligence combined to ensure survival in a world where every day was a struggle. Smaller predators learned to exploit niches, hunting insects, small vertebrates, or scavenging the remains of larger creatures. Evolution operated quietly but relentlessly, shaping every bone, muscle, and instinct with precision. Yet it was not only predators and prey that defined the age. Life experimented in form and function. Armor, spines, crests, and horns appeared as solutions to the challenges of survival. Feathers, initially for insulation, later evolved into structures used for display, signaling, or flight among theropods. Behavior became increasingly complex. Herds formed for protection. Some species coordinated migration patterns across continents. Others developed intricate mating rituals, displays of dominance, or subtle communication that is now only visible in the fossil record. Volcanic activity shaped the Earth itself. Ash clouds, lava flows, and shifting tectonic plates altered the landscapes, creating new habitats, isolating populations, and forcing life to adapt in countless ways. Floodplains became nurseries. Swamps nurtured amphibians and small reptiles. Coastal regions teemed with diversity. The very surface of the planet was alive, reshaped continually by fire, water, and the march of life. The Mesozoic climate varied across continents. Warm, humid regions favored dense vegetation and enormous herbivores, while drier zones gave rise to smaller, more agile species. Life learned to cope with extremes. Some dinosaurs evolved to store water. Others developed structures to dissipate heat or defend against rivals. Adaptation was relentless, constant, and invisible over the scale of millions of years, yet it created some of the most magnificent creatures the Earth has ever seen. Migration became a key factor in survival. Giant herds traveled across continents, following seasonal growth of vegetation and fresh water sources. Smaller species moved quietly, exploiting the spaces left by giants, avoiding predators, and expanding into new ecological niches. The interconnectedness of life was evident, not just in predator-prey dynamics, but in how the entire planet adapted and responded to the presence of these enormous, dominant creatures. Reproduction and survival strategies evolved alongside. Eggs developed protective shells, sometimes buried carefully in nests to protect the next generation. Parental care emerged in some species, an early sign of intelligence and awareness. Social structures formed, simple yet significant, ensuring that life could continue in a world of constant challenge and competition. Time, measured in millions of years, allowed evolution to refine every trait. Teeth sharpened, claws curved, and senses became acute. Eyes adapted to light and shadow, enabling hunting and evasion. Muscle systems allowed bursts of speed or long endurance. The giants of the Mesozoic world were masterpieces of adaptation, the result of relentless natural selection and patient experimentation by life itself. In the oceans, evolutionary creativity mirrored the land. Giant plesiosaurs and mosasaurs ruled the waters, hunting efficiently and traveling vast distances. Coral reefs expanded, algae thrived, and small invertebrates diversified, forming the foundation for entire marine food webs. The seas, like the lands, were alive, vast, and extraordinary. For millions of years, this balance persisted. The Earth was a world of grandeur and danger, beauty and brutality, growth and destruction. Dinosaurs dominated with authority, shaping landscapes, influencing ecosystems, and inspiring all with their size and power. Life had reached a zenith of evolution, demonstrating both fragility and resilience, chaos and order, extinction and adaptation, all woven into a tapestry of survival and creativity. And yet, even the mightiest cannot escape the inevitability of change. Environmental shifts, volcanic activity, and meteorological events continually challenged life. Species that could not adapt vanished quietly, leaving only bones and fossils to tell their story. New species arose, filling niches, evolving in complexity and sophistication. Evolution was patient, persistent, and relentless, operating beyond the perception of any single generation, crafting a world of unimaginable diversity. Then came the great cataclysm, the asteroid impact that changed everything. Fires raged, ash darkened the sky, oceans boiled in distant regions, and ecosystems collapsed in waves. Even the largest and most dominant creatures could not survive the sudden upheaval. Extinction swept across the planet, silent yet unstoppable, removing the giants that had ruled for millions of years. Life, however, endured. Small survivors, sheltered and adaptable, became the architects of the next chapters. Birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, would eventually take to the skies. Mammals, once insignificant, found new opportunities. The Earth recovered, ecosystems regrew, and the legacy of the dinosaurs persisted, embedded in bones, genes, and the memory of evolution itself. The age of dinosaurs was a world of extremes. Towering giants moved across continents, tiny predators thrived in hidden niches. And the seas, skies, and forests teemed with life of all kinds. Evolution, in its patient and relentless way, sculpted a world of extraordinary complexity, beauty, and power. Every adaptation, every predator-prey interaction, every ecological relationship contributed to the extraordinary story of life in this era. The land, the seas, and the skies were alive with movement and interaction. Life explored every possibility, adapted to every challenge, and multiplied in ways that would resonate through the ages. Dinosaurs were the rulers of this world, the embodiment of evolutionary success, and yet, like all things, their time would eventually pass, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire wonder and awe. The devastation left by the asteroid was unprecedented, yet in the shadows of the fallen giants, life quietly persisted. Tiny creatures, often hidden beneath rocks, within burrows, or among the roots of ancient plants, survived the chaos. These survivors were not grand, nor dominant, yet they carried within them the resilience and adaptability that would shape the future of life on Earth. Forests regrew slowly, ash-laden soil nurturing the first shoots of ferns and conifers. Rivers began to flow again, carrying nutrients across the landscapes, creating new habitats, new opportunities. The once vast ecosystems of the dinosaurs now echoed with the subtle sounds of smaller, less conspicuous life forms. Birds, the descendants of theropods, emerged into the skies, delicate yet enduring, a living connection to the era of giants. Mammals, previously overshadowed, began to explore niches left vacant by extinction. They moved cautiously, learning, adapting, reproducing. Life, though changed forever, was far from over. Evolution continued its patient, relentless work, shaping new forms, experimenting with body plans, feeding strategies, and behaviors. From the smallest rodent-like creatures to the early primates, each carried the genetic wisdom of survival. Honed through millions of years of challenge and change. Oceans, too, slowly recovered. Marine reptiles that had survived the upheaval continued to hunt and adapt, while smaller fish diversified rapidly to exploit the open ecological space. Coral reefs slowly returned, algae flourished, and the seas once again became arenas of life's endless experimentation. Life had endured, and the planet itself began to pulse with renewed energy. Across continents, the silent rhythms of evolution unfolded. Predation, reproduction, adaptation, these forces continued unabated. Creatures explored, migrated, and competed. Every movement, every survival strategy, every subtle adaptation contributed to the gradual shaping of a new world. The age of dinosaurs had ended, but the story of life continued quietly, persistently, and with infinite potential. In this post-cataclysmic world, time itself seemed to stretch. The days of chaos gave way to centuries of slow regrowth, millennia of adaptation. Life, though changed, had not lost its wonder. Each plant, each insect, each small mammal carried forward the memory of survival, the spark of evolution, and the promise of a future yet unwritten. Even as the shadows of the fallen giants faded into memory, their legacy persisted in the bones, genes, and behaviors of the creatures that followed. The earth, scarred but resilient, became the stage upon which mammals, birds, and countless other species would rise. Evolution, patient and relentless, had prepared the next chapter in the story of life, a story that would continue to unfold over millions of years, shaped by both catastrophe and quiet perseverance. The age of dinosaurs was gone, yet its influence lingered. From the flight of birds to the cautious steps of early mammals, from the flowing rivers to the growing forests, the echoes of that extraordinary era remained, a testament to the grandeur of life and the unstoppable force of evolution. Life endured, adapted, and quietly prepared for the adventures yet to come. The rise of mammals, survival after the firestorm. So, let us turn our gaze to a world reborn from chaos, where the giants of the Mesozoic era had vanished, leaving landscapes scarred but full of opportunity. In the shadows of extinct dinosaurs, life quietly persisted, and from this silence, the age of mammals began to unfold. Small, often nocturnal, these early mammals were humble survivors. They scurried through forests and burrows, feasting on insects, seeds, and plants. Fragile yet adaptable, they carried within them the traits that would allow them to thrive in a world suddenly devoid of dominant predators. Evolution had set the stage, and mammals were ready to claim it. The post-cataclysmic Earth was a place of contrasts. Volcanoes had reshaped the land. Ash had coated valleys, rivers had shifted courses, and forests were slow to return. Yet life persisted. Mammals used every niche, every crevice, every small opportunity to survive. Their small size, once a limitation, became an advantage. They could hide, escape, and adapt to rapid changes in climate and environment. Over millennia, mammals began to diversify. Some remained small and secretive, living in burrows and dense undergrowth. Others grew larger, exploring the open plains, learning to hunt insects, fish, and eventually other small creatures. Adaptation was relentless, and evolution patiently refined their bodies, senses, and behaviors. Fur evolved to protect against changing climates, teeth adapted to new diets, and limbs became specialized for climbing, running, and digging. Forests slowly returned, offering cover, food, and opportunities for exploration. Rivers teemed with fish, insects swarmed the air, and seeds from early plants created the beginnings of complex ecosystems. Mammals took advantage of these changes, moving into new territories, competing, cooperating, and experimenting with survival strategies. Predation, reproduction, and adaptation were constant forces shaping their evolution. Some mammals began to exhibit early social behaviors. Simple family groups formed, providing protection, warmth, and cooperation. Communication, though rudimentary, allowed coordination, whether in finding food, avoiding predators, or nurturing young. These behaviors laid the foundation for the intelligence and social complexity that mammals would later achieve. The rise of mammals was not only a story of survival but of exploration. Creatures ventured into forests, riversides, and plains, discovering resources and learning to exploit them. Their senses sharpened, vision adapted to low light, hearing became acute, and smell provided vital information about predators, prey, and mates. Every adaptation, every trial, strengthened their resilience, allowing them to flourish in a world still recovering from devastation. Climate continued to shift. Periods of warmth and cold, rainfall and drought, shaped the habitats in which mammals lived. Those that could adapt survived, those that could not, vanished quietly. Evolution was patient and relentless, refining the anatomy, behavior, and intelligence of mammals, shaping species that could endure, explore, and multiply. Some mammals began to grow larger, challenging the dominance of plants and smaller animals. Herbivorous species spread across valleys and plains, feeding on new vegetation, while omnivores experimented with diets that allowed them to thrive in diverse environments. Predatory mammals developed hunting strategies, using stealth, coordination, and speed to capture their prey. The world was alive with experimentation, adaptation, and growth. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands became critical arenas of life. Mammals evolved swimming abilities, learning to catch fish, avoid predators, and traverse landscapes. Forests provided shelter and food, while plains offered opportunities to explore movement, migration, and survival on open ground. Life was no longer hidden, it was beginning to assert itself with confidence, diversity, and resilience. Over millions of years, mammals slowly claimed dominance on a planet that had been reshaped by catastrophe. Evolution had given them the tools to thrive in every environment: forest, river, plain, and swamp. From tiny, fragile creatures to robust herbivores and clever predators, mammals began to weave themselves into the fabric of Earth's ecosystems, quietly shaping the future of life. In this post-firestorm world, time was measured not in years but in the patient rhythm of evolution. Mammals multiplied, diversified, and explored every ecological niche left vacant by the fallen giants. Life had endured the apocalypse, adapted to new challenges, and begun a slow but inexorable rise, laying the groundwork for intelligence, social behavior, and eventually, dominance on Earth. The rise of mammals was a story of resilience, adaptation, and quiet triumph. They were the inheritors of a world transformed, survivors of catastrophe, and pioneers of new ecological opportunities. From the smallest nocturnal insect eaters to the earliest larger herbivores, mammals had begun to claim their place in a dynamic, recovering Earth. The first primates, the ancestors of humanity. So, let us now journey deeper into the branches of time, into the lush forests of the early Cenozoic, where the rise of mammals had set the stage for something extraordinary: the emergence of the first primates, the ancestors of humanity. The world was changing. Forests spread across continents, filled with towering trees, thick canopies, and dappled sunlight. Rivers meandered through valleys, creating abundant sources of food and shelter. In these rich and complex ecosystems, small mammals began to experiment with life in the trees, venturing higher, learning to leap, grasp, and explore a three-dimensional world above the forest floor. These early primates were small, agile, and curious. Their bodies were adapted for climbing and grasping, with flexible fingers, opposable thumbs, and keen eyes that could detect subtle movements in the dense foliage. The sense of vision became sharper, allowing them to distinguish colors, shapes, and patterns, a critical adaptation for finding fruit, avoiding predators, and navigating the complex canopy. Life in the trees was a new frontier. It demanded balance, precision, and intelligence. Early primates learned to leap between branches, to cling to slender twigs, and to forage in a vertical world. The forest was alive with opportunity, but also danger. Predators lurked below and above, while food sources required careful planning and judgment. Survival depended not only on strength but on awareness, dexterity, and adaptability. Social behavior began to emerge. Some primates traveled in small family groups, offering protection and shared knowledge. Communication, though simple, allowed coordination, calls to warn of predators, signals to indicate food, and gestures that facilitated interaction. These early social systems were the first whispers of the complex relationships that would define later primate societies. Diet was varied. Fruit, seeds, insects, and small invertebrates provided nutrition. Flexibility in diet allowed early primates to exploit multiple niches, increasing their chances of survival. They became opportunistic foragers, learning patterns, remembering locations, and adapting to seasonal changes. Intelligence, in its earliest form, began to play a critical role in daily life. Time flowed, and evolution continued its patient work. Limbs became stronger and more precise, tails evolved for balance, and eyes moved forward on the face, enhancing depth perception. Every adaptation allowed these creatures to navigate a world full of challenges and opportunities. Movement through the trees became smoother, more coordinated, and increasingly daring. The forest canopy was alive with life. Insects buzzed, birds flitted, and the wind whispered through leaves. Early primates became part of this rhythm, moving quietly, observing, learning. Their small size allowed them to explore spaces larger mammals could not access, while their intelligence allowed them to plan, remember, and adapt. Life was an intricate dance of survival and discovery. Predation remained a constant threat. Birds of prey, snakes, and larger mammals lurked in branches and on the forest floor. Yet early primates adapted strategies to survive. Swift movement, careful observation, and the use of shelter ensured that many survived to reproduce. These adaptations were silent lessons written over generations, shaping the behaviors and abilities of their descendants. Over millions of years, the first primates diversified. Some specialized for life in the highest canopies, while others remained closer to the forest floor. Limbs, tails, and senses adapted to their specific environments. Evolution experimented quietly, relentlessly, producing a range of species, each uniquely suited to its habitat. And in these forests, the first steps toward human cognition began. Memory, problem-solving, coordination, and social interaction laid the foundation for intelligence. The ancestors of humanity were learning the rhythms of the world, the patterns of survival, and the art of adaptation. Life was no longer simply about survival, it was about exploration, learning, and growth. In this age, the stage was set for the story that would eventually lead to us. The first primates were small, fragile, and unassuming, yet they carried within them the spark of curiosity, the ability to adapt, and the potential to evolve. From the high branches of Cenozoic forests, the ancestors of humanity were quietly beginning a journey that would span millions of years, continents, and countless generations. Life in the canopy, with its challenges, dangers, and opportunities, created creatures uniquely equipped to face the future. Agile, intelligent, and social, the first primates were the architects of a legacy that would echo through time, ultimately giving rise to humans. The storytellers, thinkers, and explorers of the modern world. The emergence of primates was a quiet revolution, a patient unfolding of potential, a first step toward consciousness, culture, and civilization. Life, resilient and adaptable, had moved upward into the trees and, in doing so, had taken the first steps on a path that would one day reach the stars. The dawn of early humans, from Australopithecus to Homo erectus. So, let us now move forward into a world where the first primates have laid the foundation for something remarkable. The story of humanity begins quietly, deep in the forests and savannas of Africa, where the first early humans would take their tentative steps toward what we now recognize as intelligence, culture, and civilization. The earliest of these hominins, Australopithecus, appeared around 4 million years ago. Small, agile, and curious, they were both adapted to climbing trees and moving across the open land. Their bodies reflected this dual life, strong arms for climbing, yet sturdy legs for walking upright. They were survivors, navigating a world of predators, shifting climates, and scarce resources. Every step they took was an experiment in adaptation, a careful negotiation with the environment that demanded both caution and curiosity. Australopithecus lived in small family groups. Cooperation was essential. Individuals watched over one another, shared food, and learned to recognize danger. Communication was simple but effective. Gestures, calls, and expressions conveyed warnings and guidance. Intelligence, though primitive by modern standards, was emerging. Memory, problem-solving, and social awareness allowed these early humans to survive and thrive in a complex and often hostile world. Their diet was varied. Fruits, nuts, roots, and small animals provided sustenance. Tools were rudimentary at first: sticks, stones, and natural implements used to dig, scrape, or access food. Even these simple technologies marked a turning point. Early humans began to manipulate the world around them, bending it to their needs, exploring cause and effect, and developing skills that would eventually lead to complex tool use. Time flowed, and evolution worked patiently. Around 2 million years ago, Homo habilis emerged. Slightly larger brains, more dexterous hands, and a growing capacity for thought distinguished them from their predecessors. They learned to craft tools with intent, cutting, scraping, and shaping materials to achieve specific goals. Social structures became more sophisticated. cooperation, and learning became central to survival. Every action reinforced knowledge that could be passed from one generation to the next, a silent, unbroken chain of discovery and adaptation. The world of early humans was one of constant exploration. They moved across landscapes, seeking food, water, and shelter. The environment challenged them. Savannas offered abundant prey but little protection, forests provided cover but limited visibility. Predators were everywhere, from large cats to snakes. Life demanded vigilance, strategy, and an intimate understanding of the world. As evolution progressed, Homo erectus appeared approximately 1.9 million years ago. With larger brains and more sophisticated tools, these early humans began to dominate their environment in ways previously unimaginable. Fire, harnessed for warmth, protection, and cooking, transformed life. Social structures became more complex. Groups cooperated not just for survival but for hunting, protection, and learning. Culture, in its earliest form, began to emerge. Rituals, shared knowledge, and social bonds strengthened the group and enhanced the chance of survival. Homo erectus expanded their reach. Africa was no longer enough, they ventured into Asia and Europe. Migration required adaptation. New climates, predators, and landscapes challenged them to innovate. Clothing, shelter, and tool use became more sophisticated. Fire provided warmth in colder regions and protection against predators. Hunting strategies evolved, sometimes coordinated across groups, reflecting intelligence and foresight. Communication became increasingly vital. Gestures, vocalizations, and early symbolic behavior allowed Homo erectus to coordinate, teach, and learn. Knowledge could now be preserved beyond immediate experience. Skills were transmitted, survival strategies refined, and culture slowly began to take shape. This was a world in which thought, action, and adaptation were inseparable, a crucial foundation for the humans who would follow. Their bodies reflected their environment and lifestyle. Long legs and sturdy builds allowed endurance and efficiency in movement. Hands capable of precision grasping enabled tool use, construction, and manipulation of materials. Eyes adapted to perceive distance and subtle movement. Essential for hunting and avoiding predators. Life demanded constant alertness, intelligence, and adaptability. Time continued its patient flow. Homo erectus thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, shaping landscapes, interacting with other species, and laying the foundation for the emergence of modern humans. They explored caves, riverbanks, and open plains. They observed animal behavior, experimented with tools, and gradually learned to manipulate the world to their advantage. Fire, stone tools, and social cooperation allowed them to survive in ways no other hominin had before. Every generation added to the story. Knowledge accumulated, strategies improved, and adaptations spread. The ability to learn, to communicate, and to manipulate the environment became central to survival. From the first upright steps of Australopithecus to the technological and social innovations of Homo erectus, the journey of early humans was one of persistence, exploration, and gradual mastery of the world. Life was not easy. Predation, climate change, and scarcity of resources were constant challenges. Yet early humans endured, innovated, and spread across continents. They carried within them the spark of curiosity, intelligence, and adaptability that would define humanity. The earth itself was being reshaped by their presence, paths forged through forests, tools left as traces, and fires ignited to tame the darkness. The dawn of early humans was a story of patient evolution, exploration, and survival. From the forests of Africa to the distant lands of Eurasia, from the careful crafting of stones to the harnessing of fire, the ancestors of humanity learned, adapted, and thrived. Every step, every innovation, every shared moment in the social group contributed to a legacy that would eventually give rise to modern humans. The journey from Australopithecus to Homo erectus was both long and deliberate. It was a journey shaped by survival, intelligence, and adaptation. Every choice, every challenge, every small success added a layer to the story of what it means to be human. The dawn of early humans marked the beginning of a chapter in the Earth's history that would echo through millions of years, a patient, relentless, and extraordinary rise toward the modern world. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, a tale of two human worlds. The story begins long before cities rose, long before the first seeds were planted, even before humans imagined gods or carved symbols into stone. It begins in a world of ice and wind, a world where two different kinds of humans walked the same earth, breathed the same air, and fought the same unforgiving winters, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Two human worlds, alike and yet profoundly different, destined to cross paths on the vast stage of prehistoric Europe. The Neanderthals were already there, scattered through icy valleys, oak forests, and limestone caves stretching across Europe and Western Asia. Stocky, powerful, broad-shouldered, they were built for cold. Their muscles were like coiled springs, their chests wide, their legs sturdy. Their world smelled of pine, smoke, and winter-heavy winds. Children grew up wrapped in thick hides, learning to walk on snow before they learned to speak. Meanwhile, far away beneath the African sun, Homo sapiens sharpened their minds with language, art, long-distance travel, and rapidly evolving tools. Their bodies were slimmer, their gait lighter, their faces more delicate. Firelight danced on their skin as elders told stories, passing memory through generations. But let us step into the daily life of these two worlds as if walking quietly behind them, unseen observers in their ancient struggles. Neanderthal women, strength, silence, and survival. A Neanderthal woman woke before dawn, long before the sun touched the rim of the sky. Her world demanded constant readiness. She lived in a cave warmed by a hearth that was never allowed to die. The cold outside could kill within hours. The first thing she did each morning was check the fire, adding dry moss and sticks gathered the previous day. Her hygiene was practical, shaped by environment rather than luxury. Water was icy, washing was brief and strategic. Women cleaned themselves with handfuls of snow, smooth river stones, and sometimes ashes that acted like early antibacterial scrubs. Hair was braided tight to prevent frost from settling. Animal fats, rendered from deer, mammoth, and wild goat, were rubbed on skin to protect against dryness and cold, functioning almost like a prehistoric moisturizer. During menstruation, women used softened leather pads, moss, or woven plant fibers. Their lives demanded adaptation. They understood their bodies intimately, because their survival depended on it. Food was a constant challenge. Neanderthals needed enormous calories, sometimes more than 4,000 a day, because the cold burned energy like a silent fire. Women joined in foraging, gathering berries, roots, and nuts. They roasted tubers on flat stones, dried meat for long winters, boiled marrow bones for fat-rich broth. Mothers fed their children chewed food first, softening it with their own saliva just as many animals do, passing nutrients and immunity at the same time. Childbirth, however, was one of the greatest ordeals of Neanderthal life. A pregnant woman's belly grew heavy beneath fur wraps. Other women, sisters, mothers, older hunters, helped her through the final weeks. They recognized signs of labor the way they recognized clouds before snowstorms. Childbirth took place deep in the warmest chamber of the cave. Torches flickered. Warm water heated in stone bowls. Soft hides laid on the ground. The birthing woman gripped a wooden pole or the arm of another woman as contractions tore through her. There was pain, yes, but also an ancient rhythm. Bones, muscles, and instinct worked together. A baby emerged, broad-shouldered, heavy bones, large-headed. This was the challenge. Neanderthal newborns were bigger than Homo sapiens babies. Many mothers risked their lives at every birth. But when the child finally cried, the entire group celebrated silently with touches, hums, and shared breath. The newborn was rubbed with warm fat, wrapped in fur, and pressed against the mother's chest. Fevers were fought with herbal steam. Wounds were washed with snow melt. Illness was treated with chewed willow bark, the ancient source of natural aspirin. Death was familiar, but so was resilience. Homo sapiens women, ingenuity, ritual, and the fire of imagination, while Neanderthals faced the ice with brute strength and intimate knowledge of land, Homo sapiens faced it with innovation. A Homo sapiens woman of the African savannas or later the migrating tribes of the Near East lived in a world of color, painted hides, woven grasses, beads carved from bone and shell. Her hygiene was more developed. She washed with warm water, scented herbs, oils pressed from seeds. Her tools were smaller, sharper. Her cultural rituals surrounded everything: birth, sickness, adolescence, grief. Her diet was more varied, giving her a leaner body and often a longer lifespan. She gathered plants with scientific precision, identifying roots that cured stomach pain, leaves that stopped bleeding, seeds that provided energy, fruits that offered vitamins. As Homo sapiens slowly migrated north, following rivers and herds, their women adapted quickly. They invented clothing from stitched hides using bone needles, something Neanderthals rarely did. They created insulated boots, layered dresses, and soft inner wraps for infants. Childbirth for Homo sapiens women was also difficult. But their narrower shoulders and flexible pelvis changed the dynamic. They labored surrounded by female relatives. Rhythm was important. They sang, hummed, or tapped stones to help the mother focus through pain. Babies were smaller than Neanderthal newborns, making survival statistically easier. Infants were swaddled in woven grass cloth or thin leather wraps. Nursing continued for years. Breast milk was the most reliable food a child could receive. Mothers carved toys from bone to entertain crawling toddlers. They decorated children with beads for protection and identity. Sickness was met not only with herbs but with ritual. A healer woman, older, wise, burned aromatic leaves, painted symbols, chanted soothing melodies. Whether or not the chants had physical impact, they calmed panic, lowered stress, and gave hope, an early form of psychology. Winter, when it came, was the great equalizer. Two worlds meet, quiet footsteps on frozen ground. As Homo sapiens moved into Europe, the land trembled with the meeting of two human species. Neanderthals saw the newcomers first from afar. Tall fires glowing through trees, lighter footsteps in snow, strange spear designs leaving marks on hunted animals. Neanderthal women observed Homo sapiens' clothing with fascination. So many layers. So many patterns. They noticed their tools, longer blades, more refined shapes, hafted handles that gave leverage. They noticed their language too, fluent streams of sound, complex enough to carry ideas, warnings, emotions. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens women looked at Neanderthal strength with awe. Their thick arms, powerful legs, ability to haul massive carcasses through deep snow. They saw how Neanderthals lived intimately with the cold, how they shaped caves into warm chambers with walls lined in hides, how they shared meat instinctively. Some meetings were hostile, territory mattered, but some were curious, quiet, tender. A Neanderthal woman might trade a heavy fur cloak for a Homo sapiens bone needle. A sapiens woman might show how to twist plant fibers into rope. They exchanged glances across winter rivers, across torchlit cave mouths, across shared hunting grounds. Curiosity bridged the gap before language ever could. Daily life, two routines, two philosophies. Neanderthal women lived close to the land. Every day was survival. They cracked bones for marrow, roasted meat until fat dripped sizzling onto stones. They dried hides under cold sun, scraping them smooth with flint. They taught their daughters how to carry fire in bark containers, how to avoid eating poisonous roots, how to sense storms by the smell of air. Homo sapiens women built around creativity. They painted colors from minerals, charcoal, crushed flowers. They etched stories into cave walls, deer leaping, mammoths thundering, women dancing around hearth fires. They used beads not just for beauty but to track seasons, migrations, alliances. Food was shared in patterns, almost like early etiquette. A sapiens child learned to give the best cut to elders, the softest bone marrow to toddlers, the sweetest berries to pregnant women. Their hygiene was ritualistic. Women used warm water to clean infants daily. They stretched hides into bowls, filled them with heated stones, and created steam baths. They applied crushed mint leaves to mask odor and soothe skin, something Neanderthals rarely focused on. They even pierce ears or braid hair in elaborate styles. Both species understood love, grief, heartbreak. Both mothers hummed to sleeping children. Both held dying elders in their arms. Both whispered lullabies into cold night air. The weight of winter, two reactions to the same hardship. When the deepest winters came, fierce, endless, merciless, Neanderthal endurance was legendary. They huddled in fortified caves, sealing drafts with fur piles. Women tended fires with obsessive dedication. A single night without flame meant death. They ate fat-rich diets, roasted meat, marrow broth, ground seeds mixed with animal grease. Their bodies burned energy like furnaces. Sickness in winter was brutal. Coughing children were held close to hearths while women boiled pine needles in stone bowls for steam. Elderly parents received the best hides, the warmest spaces, the softest food. Family meant survival. Homo sapiens handled winter differently. They built temporary shelters with bone frames and animal skins. Women decorated the interiors with painted symbols, believing them protective. Their fire pits were more mobile, their tools more suited for migration. When food ran low, they moved. When herds shifted, they followed. When sickness swept through, they isolated the ill, understanding contagion instinctively. Their adaptability was fluid, almost artistic. Illness, healing, and hope. Neanderthal healing relied on strength and instinct, chewing pain-numbing herbs, applying animal fat to wounds, using moss as antiseptic dressing, singing low vibrations to calm feverish children. Homo sapiens healing relied on knowledge and ritual, mixing herbal teas, crafting slings for broken limbs, massaging with warm oils, using symbols, chants, protective beads. A Neanderthal woman believed healing came from body and nature. A Homo sapiens woman believed healing came from body, mind, and spirit. Both were right. Two paths in the same forest. For thousands of years they lived side by side, sometimes enemies, sometimes trading partners, sometimes partners in a deeper sense. They learned from one another. They watched one another raise children, brave blizzards, bury their dead, fall in love, fight, forgive. Two different human worlds, sharing the same planet, breathing the same frozen winds. And the story continued, step by step, across ice, fire, forests, and time. The Great Human Migration. How we conquered the world. The world of early humans began beneath the warm skies of Africa, where sunlight rolled across the savannas and gentle winds carried the smell of wild grass and distant rains. It was here, among the scattered trees, winding rivers, and golden plains, that our species learned to survive, to think, and to dream. For countless generations, Africa was not just a home. It was the entire universe. Every memory, every birth, every death, every discovery that shaped early Homo sapiens belonged to this vast cradle of life. And yet there came a time when the horizon no longer felt like an end, but an invitation. It started with small families moving cautiously away from familiar grounds, following herds, searching for greener pastures, noticing changes in seasons, and responding to pressures they may not have fully understood. The earth was shifting. Climate patterns stretched the dry season longer than before. Rivers shrank. Forests retreated. And with each subtle change, humans found themselves walking farther than the generations before them. One step. One valley. One river crossing. No grand plan. No leader announcing a new age. Just movement, quiet, steady, persistent. And yet, looking back through the lens of history, we understand the magnitude of what they accomplished. With each wandering path carved into the soil of East Africa, they were starting something extraordinary, the first steps of a journey that would one day spread humans across the entire planet. A journey that would connect deserts and mountains, ice and rainforests, islands and continents. The story of human migration is not one of conquest alone. It is a story of resilience, curiosity, hunger, fear, courage, accident, and hope. It is the story of how we became who we are. As early humans moved toward the northeastern edges of Africa, they encountered new landscapes carved by time and wind. Dry riverbeds, expansive dunes, rocky cliffs shaped by ancient seas, The air felt different here. The nights colder. The skies clearer. Yet something deeper pulled them forward, a quiet pull that has followed humans across every age, the desire to see what lies beyond. When they finally reached the Red Sea, they faced a threshold unlike any they had encountered. A shimmering blue expanse stretching to the horizon. The waves whispered of lands unseen, of winds unfamiliar. And around 70,000 years ago, during a period when sea levels were lower, some of our ancestors made the crossing. This was not a heroic leap. It was a simple migration, small groups moving along coastlines, following fish, shellfish, and the promise of stable food. But it was also the beginning of humanity's expansion out of Africa. As they reached the Arabian Peninsula, they found a landscape shaped by extremes, towering dunes, rugged mountains, and an atmosphere hotter and drier than anything their ancestors had known. Yet they adapted. They learned new ways of gathering food, new patterns of movement, new strategies for finding water. Step by step, they carved a new identity. From Arabia, groups splintered into different paths. Some moved north into the Levant, exploring the fertile valleys of what is now Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. Others drifted eastward, drawn into the open landscapes of Persia and beyond. Each region presented its challenges. The Middle East was a crossroads not only of land but of climate zones. To survive, early humans developed sharper observation, better cooperation, and new tools. The stone blades they crafted became finer, more versatile, better suited to new environments. Fire became not just a source of warmth, but a symbol of safety and community. As human families pushed deeper into Eurasia, they encountered winters unlike anything in Africa. Snow that covered the ground for months. Nights that froze water before dawn. Winds that cut through layers of fur and hide. And yet, instead of turning back, they adapted. They built sturdier shelters from wood, bone, and animal skins. They learned the patterns of northern animals, reindeer, mammoths, bison, and followed their migrations with remarkable precision. They figured out how to stitch clothing with sinew, creating the first true cold-weather garments. Their minds sharpened. Their creativity blossomed. Their resilience became legendary. Slowly, Europe filled with small communities that learned to thrive in icy forests and open plains. But these lands were not empty. Neanderthals were already there, strong, intelligent, deeply adapted to the cold. Encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were complex, a mix of competition, cooperation, learning, and eventually interbreeding. The migration was not a clean replacement. It was an intertwining of families, ideas, and cultures shaping the genetic story that still lives inside many people today. While some groups settled in Europe, others continued their unstoppable movement east. Across Central Asia, they followed dry steppes and open grasslands. They discovered rivers that wound through vast territories, guiding them like natural highways. They learned to track the seasons, sensed storms before they arrived, and read the land as if it were a living map. Every obstacle taught a lesson. Every risk expanded their understanding. And the journey went on. Around 50,000 years ago, some humans reached South Asia, a region defined by warm monsoons, lush forests, and abundant coastline. Life here required different skills. Fishing became essential. Coconut palms and fruit trees provided food that northern ancestors had never known. The people adapted again, changing diets, tools, and lifestyles. These adaptations were so effective that human populations grew and expanded faster than ever before. From South Asia, adventurous groups began moving towards Southeast Asia and Australia. The crossings were dangerous, the oceans unpredictable. Yet humanity's ingenuity found a way. They crafted simple rafts, followed island chains, and discovered lands filled with unique creatures: marsupials, giant flightless birds, enormous reptiles. They were the first humans to enter Australia, reshaping its ecological landscape forever. Meanwhile, farther north, humans continued spreading across Siberia. The cold here was harsher than anything in Europe. Temperatures dropped to extremes that could kill within minutes. But the people who survived learned to build shelters dug into frozen earth, to hunt in coordinated groups, and to store food for brutal winters. These skills would unlock one of the greatest achievements in human migration, the crossing into the Americas. Around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were lower, exposing a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Groups of humans stepped onto this frozen passage, not knowing they were entering an entirely new continent. Once there, they moved rapidly, following herds, rivers, and forests. Within a few thousand years, humans spread from Alaska to the tip of South America, one of the fastest expansions in the history of our species. From frozen tundra to tropical rainforests, from mountain chains to deserts, humanity adapted to every environment Earth offered. Different cultures emerged, shaped by the challenges of their landscapes. New languages were born. New tools appeared. New stories were told around campfires. The world was no longer a vast unknown. It was becoming a human world. Africa remained the heart of our origin. But now the entire planet had become our home. The Great Migration was not a single journey. It was millions of steps taken by mothers carrying children, by hunters tracking game, by elders guiding families, by dreamers following horizons. It was a movement driven by necessity, by curiosity, by courage, and sometimes by accident. Yet together, those countless footsteps transformed scattered tribes into a global, L9 species. By the time the migration ended, humans had filled deserts, jungles, mountains, plains, islands, and coasts. Every continent except Antarctica carried stories of their presence. Different cultures emerged, but they all shared one truth. They came from the same ancient families who walked out of Africa under the soft light of distant stars. And so, the earth became connected through the footsteps of its wanderers, through the people who could never resist the call of the unknown. The pull of a new horizon, the promise of a world waiting to be discovered. The birth of civilization, agriculture, villages, and the first cities. In the beginning, humanity walked. Across endless plains, through forests heavy with dew, over rivers glistening under newborn sunlight. Generation after generation moved like wind, never staying long enough to leave a mark. Fires died behind them. Footprints vanished. Trails faded. Their homes were temporary, their hopes were brief sparks under the open sky. But then came the morning that reshaped the world. At the edge of a valley, wide, golden, and untouched, a young woman knelt beside the ground. Her tribe had camped here only for the night. The rain had fallen heavily, washing the soil into soft ripples. She noticed something curious. From the scattered grains her people had dropped during yesterday's meal, tiny green shoots were pushing their way upward. She touched one gently. It wasn't a plant she had seen here before. It was their plant, one they carried with them from valley to valley. And now, it was growing without being guarded, hunted, or carried. It grew simply because the earth decided it could. She called the others. Adults stood around her quietly, watching the brave, tender shoots sway in the early wind. Children knelt beside her, wide-eyed. For the first time, humanity felt the earth was speaking, not in storms or floods or famine, but in possibility. That morning, no one said a word. But something old inside the human heart cracked open. And seasons passed. Tribes returned to the same valley again and again. They dropped more seeds, intentionally now. They became familiar with the curve of the hill, the sound of the river, the shade of the trees where children liked to play. By the time spring returned, entire patches of green swayed across the fields. Not wild. Not accidental. But human-made. It was the first intentional harvest. Women collected grains in woven baskets. Men cut tall stalks with flint blades. Boys tied bundles together. Elders smiled at the unfamiliar feeling, stability. For the first time, humans didn't have to chase food. Food was coming to them. It felt like magic. But it was only the beginning. Agriculture whispered into existence. Dawn became a time for watering fields. Midday for checking seedlings. Evening for crushing grain into flour. Children no longer wandered endlessly behind nomadic groups. Elders grew old in one place. Women gained new influence, for food now came from their hands as much as from the hunters. And the human mind shifted. Planning replaced improvisation. Foresight replaced wandering. Dreams stretched from one season to the next. The fields became classrooms. The sky became a calendar. The earth became a partner. Soon, the first homes rose, lean-tos of branches, mud and straw huts, roofs thatched with wild grasses. They were permanent. One home became four. Four became a cluster. A cluster became a village. And new sounds filled the air, sounds humanity had never known. A baby crying in the same place it would take its first steps. Grain being pounded on stone. Women laughing while shaping clay pots. The hum of conversations at dusk beneath soft, orange firelight. A village meant identity. People now belonged to a place. They decorated walls with handprints, carved symbols into posts, and buried their dead near their homes. Death was no longer abandonment, it was memory. Women became the architects of this new world. They kept seeds, stored food, invented pottery, organized grain, and taught which plants healed fevers or carried poison. Their knowledge became the quiet foundation of civilization. While men hunted, women kept the village alive. And when men returned, women fed them food shaped by soil. But the earth was not always gentle. Floods drowned fields. Droughts cracked the soil. Insects arrived like storms. Wolves prowled at night. Each hardship carved lessons. Humans raised homes on higher ground, dug irrigation ditches, cleared fields before planting, studied seasons, and observed stars. Intelligence expanded. Shadows, winds, birds, and moon cycles became teachers. Knowledge became power. Cooperation became the backbone of community. People worked together to build canals, storage rooms, kilns, meeting spaces. Civilization rose from shared labor, not war. One year, the harvest produced more food than the village could eat. Surplus. A miracle. More than survival, opportunity. Grain could be traded for shells. Tools, pigments, skins. Trade networks spread like invisible webs across valleys and rivers. Where footsteps once disappeared, connections remained. Villages swelled into towns. New homes. New families. New paths. New rituals. Specialization emerged. Farmers, potters, hunters, weavers, healers, shepherds, stargazers. No one needed to do everything. People did what they did best. Life became richer. Humanity followed rivers. Nile. Tigris. Euphrates. Industry, Yellow River. Water shaped abundance. Abundance shaped ambition. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. Cities were unlike anything before. Boundaries. Districts. Markets. Workshops. Storage towers rising above rooftops. Thousands of footsteps. Clanging metal. Cracking pottery. Chanting rituals. Bargaining voices. In their hearts stood granaries, tall, guarded, organized. Someone counted grain. Someone distributed it. Someone protected it. Leaders emerged, not kings, but record keepers. Writing was born not from poetry, but from accounting. Clay tablets became civilization's first memory. People still prayed for rain, still feared storms, still honored the dead. But now they woke to the sound of a city, a new heartbeat echoing across stone, mud brick, and the dreams of a species learning to build its world. Humanity had stepped into a future shaped entirely by its own hands. The ancient empires, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, a journey through four civilizations that shaped the human story, before the world had borders, before nations claimed flags, before history carved itself into scrolls and stone tablets. The ancient empires rose like pillars in the long corridor of human memory. They emerged beside rivers, beneath burning suns, under marble skies. They sculpted laws, built monuments, forged philosophies, and mapped the paths that all future civilizations would follow. For worlds, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome grew from dust and ambition. For worlds that still echo in our languages. Our architecture, our politics, our dreams. And this is their story. Egypt, the kingdom of eternity. The Nile did not just flow, it breathed life. Every drop of water carried whispers of survival, faith, and rebirth. Along its banks, the early Egyptians learned something extraordinary. If the river could rise and fall with rhythm, life itself must have a rhythm too. From this rhythm, an empire was born. Farmers shaped the mud into bricks, smoothing them under a sun so bright it painted the world gold. Priests mapped the heavens, convinced the stars were messages from gods. Architects dreamed in impossible angles, sketching lines that would one day rise into pyramids so tall the desert winds bowed before them. Inside every Egyptian city, color ruled. Turquoise, red, ochre, and green decorated walls and tombs, telling stories and images the world could understand without a single written word. Yet they wrote anyway, carefully, precisely, etching hieroglyphs that turned life into sacred mathematics. And the pharaohs, those living gods, walked through this land draped in linen and power. Some were ruthless, some visionary, some forgotten, some immortalized forever. Women held a place in Egypt that surprised the rest of the ancient world. They owned property, ran businesses, even ruled as queens without apology. Nefertiti's elegance shaped an entire artistic era. Hatshepsut's ambition carved temples out of mountains. Cleopatra's intellect made emperors tremble. In the villages, ordinary families lived by the rise and retreat of the river. Children ran barefoot through fields, mothers baked bread in clay ovens, fathers harvested grain to store against the famine months. Healing came through honey, herbs, prayers, and amulets shaped like the eye of Horus to guard against unseen dangers. Egypt believed in life after death so fiercely that death became merely a doorway. Every tomb was not a grave, but a promise. Every mummy was a testament to the idea that the soul deserved a second sunrise. The desert held their secrets, the river held their lives, and the gods held everything else. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. If Egypt was a kingdom of eternity, Mesopotamia was a land of invention. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the soil turned fertile and fragile all at once. Floods came without warning. Storms erased fields overnight. But humanity is stubborn, especially when survival is on the line. And so the earliest cities the world had ever known rose from this unpredictable earth. Ur, Babylon, Nineveh, names that still strike the tongue like thunder. In these bustling streets, writing was born, not artful like Egyptian hieroglyphs but practical and sharp, pressed into clay tablets with reeds. Cuneiform was humanity's first attempt to capture thoughts before they vanished into memory. Through it, they recorded laws, debts, stories, and even the earliest epics about heroes wrestling with gods and fate. In Mesopotamia, rulers sought power not just over people but over time itself. Hammurabi carved his laws into stone, declaring justice as something predictable, something etched. Something no king could bend at will. Families now lived under a rulebook that balanced punishment with order, crime with consequence. Children learned mathematics long before most of the world even counted. Astronomers observed stars not for myth but for prediction, creating calendars and mapping celestial cycles. Merchants traveled roads that would one day grow into trade networks connecting continents. But Mesopotamia was not only logic and law, it was also myth. Gods of storm, gods of fertility, gods of death and resurrection. Temples rose like mountains built by human hands. Priests interpreted omens in smoke, sacrificed goats to ask for rain, and read the future in the liver of animals, a practice strange yet deeply sacred in their world. Women wove fabrics in courtyards lit by lanterns. Men shaped bronze in roaring furnaces. Children played beside rivers that had seen the very birth of civilization. Mesopotamia was not gentle, but it was brilliant, and it taught humanity how to build, measure, dream, and remember. Greece, the birthplace of thought, theater, and democracy, where Egypt built monuments and Mesopotamia carved laws, Greece crafted ideas. Low mountains, rugged coastlines, and a sea scattered with islands shaped a people who were adventurous, curious, and endlessly argumentative. City-states like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes each forged their own identities, sometimes allies, sometimes bitter enemies. In Athens, democracy was born, not perfect, not equal, but revolutionary. Men stood in open assemblies debating war, taxes, justice, and philosophy. Voices rose, ideas clashed, and the world's first political experiments took shape. Greek philosophers wandered barefoot through agora marketplaces, teaching anyone willing to listen. Socrates questioned everything. Plato built worlds within words. Aristotle studied the patterns of nature, laying the groundwork for science. Art and imagination flourished. The Greeks staged tragedies that explored shame, destiny, betrayal, and love in massive amphitheaters carved into hillsides. Actors wore masks that magnified emotions, and audiences wept as heroes battled their flaws more fiercely than any enemy. Meanwhile, in Sparta, childhood was a training ground, discipline a religion, and strength the ultimate virtue. The contrast between Athens and Sparta carved a duality that defined Greek culture: mind and muscle, poetry and war, democracy and discipline. Greek women lived differently depending on where they were born. Athenian women tended homes, weaving and raising children. Spartan women trained, managed property, and spoke boldly in public. Gods and humans lived close in Greek imagination. Zeus's storms, Poseidon's waves, Athena's wisdom, Aphrodite's desire. Temples crowned cliffs and hills, marble glowing under Mediterranean light. The Parthenon stood like a poem carved in stone, a tribute to balance and proportion. And then came Alexander, the young king who refused to believe the world had borders. He swept across continents, spreading Greek language and culture from Egypt to India, creating a bridge between civilizations that still influences art, science, and philosophy today. Greece taught humanity how to think, how to question, how to create beauty from logic and chaos at the same time. Rome, the empire that refused to stand still, Rome did not rise quietly. It rose with ambition, discipline, and an iron belief that order could tame the world. What began as a small settlement on 7 hills grew into an empire that wrapped itself around the Mediterranean like a golden ring. Soldiers marched with precision across continents, building roads straighter than arrows, forts sturdier than mountains, bridges that defied rivers and time. Roman law became the backbone of the empire, shaping everything from property rights to justice systems that still echo in modern courts. Latin became the mother tongue of empires, churches, scholars, and poets. In the heart of Rome, life pulsed with intensity. Senators debated beneath marble columns. Merchants haggled in noisy markets. Gladiators fought beneath the roaring crowds of the Colosseum, where entertainment blurred with brutality. Bathhouses steamed with fragrant oils. Aqueducts carried water across impossible distances. Libraries held scrolls filled with knowledge inherited from Greece and expanded by Roman engineers, doctors, and philosophers. Roman women lived layered lives. Some commanded influence from behind villa doors. Some owned businesses and managed estates. Some were enslaved, some revered, some forgotten. But Rome lived in more than its cities. It lived in the people who carried Roman culture across the known world. Soldiers stationed in far provinces married local women, traders adopted local customs, conquered peoples adopted Roman clothing, law, architecture, and language. Rome expanded. Rome unified. Rome transformed everything it touched. And even when it fractured, even when invaders stormed its gates and its flags fell, Rome did not truly fall. Its ideas simply spread, reshaped, and continued inside the nations that grew from its ashes. The Middle Ages. Knights, kingdoms, plagues, and faith. The Middle Ages began like a long breath taken after the storm of Rome's collapse. The old empire had crumbled, its roads cracked, its cities dimmed, its libraries smoldered. Out of the ruins, Europe stood uncertain, like a child waking from a dream it did not understand. Forests swallowed abandoned structures. Roads once crowded with merchants became paths for wolves and wandering monks. Yet in this silence, something new began to grow, slowly, quietly, from ashes and memory. Kingdoms rose where fragments of Rome once stood. Tribes forged nations, and the medieval world took shape with a mixture of fear, devotion, ambition, and hope. Across the continent, castles began to pierce the horizon. stone guardians watching over farmland and forests. Their towers cast long shadows over villages where people lived simple, fragile lives. Inside these walls, power was defined not by wealth alone, but by land, bloodline, and the loyalty of armored men who swore oaths stronger than iron. Knights became the symbols of this world, warriors wrapped in steel, mounted on horses trained for thunder. They learned to fight before they learned to read. Their childhoods were carved by discipline, by the weight of wooden swords and the sting of bruises earned in practice yards. By the time they earned their spurs, they had become the armored heart of every medieval army, sworn to defend their lord, their land, and the fragile idea of honor. But outside the castles, life moved at a different rhythm. Most people were peasants, villagers who woke with sunrise, worked fields until their hands split, and slept beside the same earth that fed them. They lived in timber cottages that smelled of smoke and straw. Families gathered around low wooden tables to share bread coarse with barley husks, cabbage stews simmered for hours, and small slices of salted meat reserved for special days. The church bells guided their days. The call to prayer, the call to work, the call to rest. In winter, fires crackled inside homes sealed with mud. Children huddled beneath blankets made of rough wool, listening to elders tell stories of saints, monsters, and distant lands where deserts shimmered like gold. The world was smaller then, often no wider than a day's walk to the nearest market. But imagination traveled far beyond mountains, beyond seas, carried by traveling bards, monks, and merchants. Life was difficult, but it was threaded with meaning, and faith was the strongest thread of all. Christianity shaped the medieval world like a sculptor shapes clay. Every village had its priest, every kingdom had its church, and every soul, no matter how poor, believed the world of the spirit was far vaster than the world they could see. Monasteries rose in remote valleys, where monks copied ancient texts by candlelight, their quills scratching the silence. They tended medicinal gardens, cared for the sick, fed travelers, and preserved knowledge that might otherwise have vanished forever. Some monasteries became centers of learning, others fortresses of peace, others quiet sanctuaries where men and women sought refuge from a world that often felt unstable and cruel. Yet the medieval age was not defined by peace. It was an age of crusades, waves of holy wars that carried knights, kings, and commoners across continents in the name of faith and destiny. It was an age of invasions. Vikings stormed the coasts with fire and axes, Mongols thundered across the east with unstoppable ferocity. It was an age of power struggles. Families waged quiet wars behind castle gates, and crowns changed hands through battles, betrayals, and whispers in the dark. But nothing shaped the Middle Ages more brutally than the plague. The Black Death moved like a shadow across Europe in the mid-1300s, silent at first, then roaring like a nightmare. It slipped aboard ships from distant ports, hid in the fur of rats, grew in the bellies of fleas, and spread through villages with terrifying speed. People woke to find neighbors feverish, families coughing blood, entire streets emptying within days. Cities sealed their gates. Priests prayed over mass graves. Doctors wore masks shaped like beaks, filled with herbs they hoped would purify the air. Fear wrapped itself around every home. Mothers carried sick children to monasteries begging for mercy. Fathers dug graves with trembling hands. And all across the continent, church bells tolled like a heartbeat for the dying world. Yet even in the darkest nights, humanity found ways to endure. Some villages turned to faith, filling churches with candlelight and desperate hymns. Some turned to knowledge, studying herbs, learning from older medical texts, rediscovering ancient remedies long forgotten. And slowly, painfully, Europe rose from the devastation changed, shaken, but not broken. After the plague retreated, a strange, restless hunger filled the continent, the hunger for progress, for learning, for new ideas, for a world larger than the one they had inherited. Kings rebuilt their courts with scholars and advisors rather than warlords alone. Knights refined the code of chivalry, transforming brute strength into disciplined virtue. Merchants expanded trade routes, carrying silk, spices, maps, and ideas from east to west. And in universities, from Paris to Bologna to Oxford, young thinkers began to study not only theology, but law, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. The medieval woman's world was complex. In cottages and farms, women brewed ale, baked bread, tended gardens, and raised children with a courage shaped by the uncertainty of life. In towns, women ran bakeries, cloth shops, taverns, and markets. Noble women managed estates while their husbands marched to war, acting as stewards, negotiators, and sometimes warriors themselves. Queens influenced kingdoms through diplomacy, alliances, and in some cases sheer force of will. Midwives guarded the wisdom of childbirth, herbs, and healing passed through generations. And everywhere, beneath castle roofs, behind monastery walls, inside humble cottages, faith guided choices, comforted fears, and shaped the moral spirit of the age. By the late Middle Ages, architecture itself became a form of worship. Cathedrals rose with arches that seemed to defy gravity, windows that glowed with stained glass stories, ceilings that drew the eye toward heaven. Builders worked for decades, sometimes centuries, carving stone with devotion rather than haste. These cathedrals were not merely buildings, they were prayers set in marble, songs frozen in rooftops, hopes shaped in stone. Chivalry evolved too. Knights trained not only for war but for courtly behavior, honoring women, protecting the weak, showing mercy to the defeated. Troubadours sang of forbidden love and noble sacrifice. Tournaments filled castle grounds with cheers as knights jousted for glory, their lances shattering against shields painted with family crests. Yet even with its romance, the Middle Ages were never far from brutality. Life could turn in an instant, through famine, war, betrayal, or disease. Medieval medicine struggled between superstition and science. Treatments ranged from herbal balms and heated stones to bloodletting and charms meant to ward off evil spirits. Children grew up fast, adults aged early, and elders carried the wisdom of survival more than the luxury of rest. Still, despite its hardship, the medieval world pulsed with creativity. Illuminated manuscripts shimmered in gold leaf. Carvers shaped mythical beasts into furniture and cathedral doorways. Blacksmiths forged armor that seemed to breathe like a second skin. And travelers carried stories from distant lands, tales of deserts, spices, strange animals, and empires unknown. The Middle Ages became a bridge between ancient glory and the brilliance yet to come, a long, rugged. The Industrial Revolution, machines, power, and global change, it began quietly, almost unnoticeably, on the damp, coal-stained streets of late 18th century Britain. No trumpet declared its arrival. No chronicler proclaimed that human life was about to be reshaped forever. And yet, behind the wooden doors of small workshops, in the dim glow of oil lamps, a new force was waking. It was not a king, nor an army, nor a prophet. It was a machine. The world that came before it now feels impossibly distant. Europe had long moved at the pace of muscle, wind, and water. Farmers bent for hours over the soil, blacksmiths hammered iron by hand, and merchants traveled only as fast as a horse could run. Production was slow, fragile, and dependent on nature's moods. But the people of Britain, crowded into misty towns buzzing with trade, were beginning to feel a restlessness. Ideas simmered. Resources piled up. And then came the spark. In a textile mill in the British countryside, the whirring of gears echoed for the first time as spinning machines replaced the fingers of workers. The earliest spinners were loud, clumsy things, great wooden frames pulled by water wheels, but they changed everything. Cloth, once a slow and precious craft, poured out in quantities no medieval artisan could have imagined. Merchants saw profits multiply. Workers saw their traditional livelihoods threatened. And Europe felt the first tremor of the revolution that would redefine the human experience. But machines powered by water still bent to the will of rivers. The true leap came when a brilliant Scotsman named James Watt looked at the primitive steam engines of his time and imagined something cleaner, stronger, faster. His improved steam engine did not just pump water from mines, it powered mills, ironworks, and factories. For the first time, humanity harnessed a source of power that did not depend on wind or water. It depended only on fire. Factories rose like giant iron beasts across Britain's landscape. Wide brick buildings crowned with smokestacks that darkened the sky. Inside, hundreds of workers moved in rhythmic unison among machines that hissed, clattered, and roared. The very sound of life changed. The quiet symphony of fields was replaced by the metallic thunder of industry. Cities swelled almost overnight. Manchester, once a market town, exploded into a sprawling urban center where chimneys stood taller than church steeples. The streets were crowded with workers from dawn until far past dusk. Families who had lived for generations in rural villages packed their belongings and moved to the cities, lured by the promise of wages paid weekly in coins. But the new industrial life demanded a different kind of endurance. Thick smoke hung permanently in the air. Cold dust settled on windowsills and food alike. Children squeezed between massive machines, cleaning gears because their small hands could reach the tight spaces. Men and women labored for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, their faces illuminated by the glow of furnaces and lamps. Yet, for all the hardship, this was also an age of astonishing human daring. Iron, once rare and expensive, flooded into European markets as new smelting techniques transformed production. Inventors pushed boundaries that earlier centuries never dreamed of. Stronger metals built taller buildings, sturdier bridges, and tools that carried unimaginable precision. The great engineering projects of the 19th century, railways stretching beyond the horizon, canals slicing through continents, ships forged from iron instead of wood, were the children of this new industrial age. And then came the moment that shifted the world's tempo forever, the railway. When the first steam locomotives roared across the countryside, people stood in awe. The ground shook beneath their feet. Vast engines, belching steam and fire, tore across miles in minutes. What once took days could now take hours. Villages that had been isolated for centuries suddenly found themselves connected to cities teeming with opportunity. Europe felt smaller, faster, more alive. London, Paris, Berlin, and New York transformed into glowing arteries of industry and ambition. Goods traveled farther than ever before, cotton from America to England, British textiles to Africa, German steel to Russia. Trade networks intertwined continents in a new economic web. For the first time, humanity lived not in isolated regions, but in a world linked by the unstoppable momentum of machines. Factories multiplied. Mass production became the new gospel. Standardized goods, everything from nails to sewing machines to rifles, could be built quickly, cheaply, and in identical form. This consistency changed warfare, commerce, communication, and domestic life. Even the home was transformed. Gas lamps replaced candles, iron stoves replaced open hearths, factory-made clothing replaced handmade garments. But the revolution was not just mechanical. It was intellectual. Scientific curiosity bloomed like never before. Educators demanded literacy. Engineers were celebrated like artists. Inventors risked fortunes, reputations, and sometimes their lives in pursuit of the next breakthrough. Across Europe and America, laboratories and workshops became the modern temples of progress. Of course, not everyone welcomed this rapid change. Romantic poets mourned the loss of untouched landscapes. Workers protested unsafe conditions and poverty wages. Philosophers debated whether progress had a soul. And yet, despite the turmoil, the world surged ahead, driven by the same force that had once hummed quietly in those early British mills. Steam gave way to electricity. Coal-fired engines evolved into powerful turbines. Telegraphs transmitted messages at the speed of lightning, shrinking distances once more. Industrialization leapt across oceans, first to America, then to the wider world, pulling entire nations into a new global age shaped not by kings or empires, but by innovation, production, and power. It was messy. It was magnificent, and it changed human history more deeply than almost any era that came before it. The modern era, wars, technology, and the digital world, it began with a century that refused to stay quiet. The 1900s opened like a storm over the Western world, restless, ambitious, trembling with inventions and rivalries. Empires stretched across continents, cities pulsed with electric light, and mankind walked with the confidence of a species that believed it finally understood the world. But beneath that confidence lay a fuse waiting to be lit. When it finally ignited, it reshaped the modern era with a violence and speed that history had never witnessed before. The guns of World War I shattered the illusion of progress. Millions of young men marched into battle believing they were fighting for glory, unaware that the modern machine age had turned war into something unrecognizable. Trenches carved deep wounds into the soil of Europe. Mud, rats, barbed wire, screams in the dark. Machine guns tore through ranks that had once fought in colorful uniforms and orderly lines. Poison gas rolled silently over battlefields, turning the very air into a weapon. For 4 long years, Europe's great powers bled themselves dry under gray skies filled with smoke and despair. When the war ended, the world looked at itself with hollow eyes. Old empires collapsed. Borders were redrawn. A generation was lost. And yet, the chaos cleared just enough for new ideas to rise. The 1920s roared with jazz, cinema, radio, and fashion that glittered defiantly against the trauma of the past. Women gained new freedoms. Automobiles raced down freshly paved roads. Airplanes soared higher each year, carrying the human imagination with them. It felt, for a moment, as if the world had stepped into a brighter future. But the peace was fragile. When the global economy crumbled in 1929, the crash rippled across continents, leaving factories silent and families hungry. Into this vacuum of desperation came dictators who promised order, strength, and rebirth. Fascism took root. Militaries expanded. And soon Europe once again found itself marching toward catastrophe. World War II erupted with a scale and brutality the world had never seen. Blitzkrieg tanks thundered across borders. Cities burned under relentless bombing. Entire populations were hunted, imprisoned, exterminated. The Holocaust carved an eternal scar into human memory, mechanized genocide in the heart of modern Europe. Battles raged in the deserts of Africa, the jungles of the Pacific, the snow-covered fields of Russia. The war ended only when 2 blinding flashes of atomic light rose over Japan, ushering humanity into the nuclear age. For the first time, humans possessed the power to erase cities in an instant. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the world was exhausted but transformed. Old colonial empires crumbled. The United Nations emerged. A new rivalry divided the globe into 2 ideological giants, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their struggle, the Cold War, never became a direct battlefield, yet its shadow touched every corner of the world. Spies traded secrets in dark alleys. Nations built missiles capable of ending civilization. Children practiced hiding under their desks in case the sky suddenly caught fire. But even in this tense climate, humanity pushed forward into realms once thought impossible. Rockets pierced the upper atmosphere. Satellites circled the Earth. And on a quiet July night in 1969, the world watched in breathless wonder as humans walked on the moon. The digital future was being written line by line in laboratories, universities, and modest garages where young engineers tinkered with circuits and dreams. Meanwhile, society itself was shifting. Civil rights movements rose in America. Colonized nations declared independence. Women demanded equality. Protesters flooded streets from Paris to London to Washington, challenging the traditions that had shaped centuries. The modern era was no longer just about machines, it was about identity, justice, freedom, and the right to define one's place in a rapidly changing world. By the late 20th century, technology began to accelerate with a speed that felt almost supernatural. Computers shrank from room-sized machines to objects that fit on desks. The internet quietly appeared, at first a curiosity for scientists and researchers. But soon it grew into a vast, interconnected web that swept across the world. Emails replaced letters. Digital screens replaced paper. Information moved faster than any messenger horse, any telegraph wire, any radio wave humanity had ever known. As the 21st century dawned, the world crossed an invisible threshold. Smartphones put more computing power in a single palm than NASA had during the moon landing. Social media reshaped politics, culture, and relationships. Artificial intelligence emerged, silent, tireless, learning at a pace no human could match. Cars began to drive themselves. Virtual worlds expanded. Entire businesses existed only online. The global population doubled. Cities grew into megacities glowing with neon and electricity. But the modern era carried new anxieties as well. Climate change altering oceans and weather, cyber warfare fought with invisible weapons, pandemics sweeping across continents with terrifying speed. Humanity lived in a world of astonishing innovation yet profound vulnerability. Nations were connected more tightly than ever before, yet disagreements seemed to grow sharper, louder, more urgent. And through it all, one truth became unmistakable. Diseases are mapped like constellations, edited gene by gene. Tiny robots swim through arteries, repairing tissue with quiet patience. Artificial limbs respond to the mind like natural extensions of the body. Blindness, once a sentence, becomes a challenge. Paralysis, once final, becomes a problem waiting to be solved. People begin to live longer, not just in years, but in strength, clarity, and joy. And beside these miracles stands another frontier, space. Humanity has always looked upward. The first ancestors stared at the Milky Way with wonder. Ancient sailors followed constellations across dark seas. Astronomers charted the heavens with ink and trembling hands. Now the future calls with the same voice but a new invitation. Come closer. Across the sky rise colonies orbiting Earth, glittering rings of metal and light. Some serve as research labs, some as fragile homes, some as stepping stones to worlds beyond. On the moon, dust settles around silver habitats warmed by sunlight harvested through mirrors the size of continents. On Mars, domes shine like beacons against the red desert, protecting gardens of oxygen, water, and life. The journey is difficult, terrifying, expensive, but humanity moves forward anyway, because exploration is its oldest instinct, older than language, older than civilization, older perhaps than Homo sapiens themselves. Yet as humanity expands outward, it must also look inward. For the future is not only rockets and machines, it is choices. Technology grows powerful, almost frighteningly so. Artificial intelligence becomes a partner, a teacher, a guide, and at times, a mystery. It paints pictures no artist has ever imagined. It composes music that feels like dreams translated into sound. It solves equations that once took lifetimes. It predicts weather, cures diseases, and speaks every language on Earth. But it also forces humanity to ask new questions. What does it mean to be human when machines can think? What does it mean to work when robots can build? What does it mean to create when algorithms can imagine? What does it mean to love, to hope, to dream? The answers shape nations. They shape cultures. They shape the future more deeply than any war or empire ever did. Climate change remains a shadow in this new age, a reminder that history does not truly end, it only transforms. Some coastlines drown beneath rising tides. Forests migrate. Storms roar with unfamiliar fury. Yet humans adapt with the same resilience that carried them through ice ages, plagues, and wars. Floating cities rise on the water. Artificial clouds cool the sky. New forests spread across lands once barren. Ancient species return. Humanity learns to be a guardian, not a conqueror. And while technology shapes cities, something else begins to shift quietly in the human heart. People rediscover old rhythms, connection, community, balance. They seek meaning in meditation, in art, in family, in the simple act of breathing in a fast-moving world. The future, despite its shimmering screens and humming towers, becomes a place where humans search for themselves more deeply than ever before. Digital worlds blur with physical ones. People attend concerts in virtual landscapes. Friends separated by oceans meet in shared simulations. Distances shrink. Identities expand. A child in Tokyo plays chess with a child in Nairobi. A teacher in Helsinki tutors a class in Rio. A doctor in Toronto saves a life in rural India with a robotic arm thousands of miles away. Civilization becomes something woven across borders, an interconnected heartbeat pulsing through cables, satellites, and algorithms. And yet, for all its wonders, the future holds dangers that whisper at the edges of progress. Misused technology, fragile ecosystems, artificial intelligence growing faster than wisdom, human disagreements amplified by global networks. The choices made in this era decide whether civilization ascends or collapses. But humanity has always been a species of storytellers, capable of learning, adapting, rising from ashes again and again. From stone tools to starships, from cave paintings to quantum computers, from tribes gathered around small fires to billions connected through the glow of digital screens. The story continues because humans dare to imagine it. Perhaps the future holds worlds beyond the solar system. Perhaps consciousness will travel across machines and bodies like light across glass. Perhaps humans will shape new forms of life, new cultures, new philosophies. Perhaps civilization will become something unrecognizable, yet rooted still in the same ancient spark that first ignited on the plains of Africa. The future of humanity is not a single path. It is a horizon, wide, untamed, luminous. And as long as humans continue to dream, the story will never end.